On 4th of December, we'll be celebrating Navy Day.
And 4th of December was chosen after the 71 war.
What was the role of the Indian Navy in the war?
Like I explained in the beginning, but essentially remember that the role of the Navy in this war was, हम आज किसी को पूछते हैं कि भाई 71 वॉर में आर्मी चीफ कौन था, एवरीवन विल से सैम मैनेक्शॉ. बट आप पूछो नेवी का चीफ कौन था, no one knows. But Admiral Nanda deserves some recognition for the way he led Navy in 71 war and the people who built the Navy.
Let's start with the ancient, which mostly covers the Harappan civilization and talks a lot about the Vedic era of our maritime histories.
We were to that time what perhaps, Europe or USR or where, as a fulcrum of ideas and commerce and everything else.
So, is it fair to say that all these European colonizers, their aim was to look for India just because for trade?
So their original intent was certainly trade. But they were also interested in...
Were there any Indian mariners who had gone to another region for conquest?
It is entirely possible that until the 10th, 11th century, Indian traders, Indian people and Indian explorers may have gone. A gentleman named Ibn Majid. Now that gentleman supposedly navigated Vasco da Gama because he didn't know the way from Malindi to India across the seas.
How important is Navy in the growth of a country, sir?
If you want national prosperity, you must have secure seas. And remember, ensuring that your trade is safe is one of the biggest but least known or unsung roles of the Navy.
Can we, as a nation, counter China's rise in this region, sir? On this special episode, we celebrate Navy Day with Commodore Kesnur, a distinguished naval officer, an historian, and a storyteller. Navy Day is celebrated every year on December 4th, marks the Indian Navy's remarkable role in the 1971 war, a date chosen to honor its courageous operations. But Navy Day is more than just a commemoration. It's a reminder of the Navy's vital contribution to India's defense, its diplomacy, and the economy. In this episode, Commodore Kesnur takes us on a captivating journey through the history of the Indian Navy, from its glorious maritime power during the Chola Dynasty to its modern achievements like building indigenous aircraft carriers and training allied forces. We explore the Navy's role in shaping India's global influence through trade, deterrence, and even soft power diplomacy. We also touch upon fascinating topics like the rise and decline of India's maritime legacy, the pivotal role of the Navy in the 1971 war, and its evolution post-independence. Plus, we dive into the Navy's use of cutting-edge technologies like drones and how young Indians can become a part of this proud institution. This conversation is a celebration of India's maritime legacy and a reflection of what makes the Indian Navy a cornerstone of the nation's strength and resilience. So let's set sail with Commodore Kesnur as we explore the stories behind the waves. Without further ado, let's get started. Before we dive into today's conversation, I want to take a quick moment and ask for a favor. We noticed that 93% of you who watch our content regularly aren't subscribed yet. My promise to you is simple. If you hit that subscribe button, we'll keep working hard to bring thought-provoking conversations, incredible guests, and the topics you really care about the most. It is practically free for you, but it makes a huge difference for us, helping us grow, reach more people, and bring even better content your way. Thank you for supporting. It means the world to us. Now let's get back to the video. It's Navy Day coming up for India as well on 4th of December. We'll be celebrating Navy Day on the 4th of December. Do you want to tell us a little about the significance of this day, sir?
Yeah, absolutely. The country celebrates the Navy Day on the 4th of December. And 4th of December was chosen after the 71 war. Earlier it used to be 15th December. But 4th December was chosen after the 71 war to sort of mark and commemorate the Navy's grand show in the war. You see, before 71, Navy had sporadic opportunities to be part of the national war machine. I mean, its role, it had a good role to play in Junagadh and in Goa liberation of 61. That was not noticed much. It had a very limited role in 65. And therefore, there was a sense that the Navy should also contribute to the national war effort, which came in 71. And the Navy put up such a grand show in both the seas, the attack on Karachi, Operation Trident and Python on 4th and 8th December, the show in Bay of Bengal where, whole of East Pakistan was completely choked and strangulated, the role in naval special commando operations, wherein the water wing of Mukti Bahini was sort of, trained to cause lots of destruction within East Pakistan, the sinking of Ghazi, and indeed also the sad loss of Kukri, So all of that came together to show the Navy's role in the 71 war. It made people aware of what the Navy could do. It made possible the surrender because you effectively choked the escape route for people going from, those who wanted to escape. Now they were blocked. They couldn't go through land, they couldn't go by air, and they couldn't go by sea, which is why you had more than 90,000 prisoners of war. So the Navy had an equal role as the other services in the ultimate outcome of the war. So to commemorate all that, the Indian Navy decided from 1972 onwards that 4th December will be the Navy Day.
Beautiful, sir.
Yeah. Now, obviously, you also, like I said, while you commemorate, you also remember those who laid their lives in line of duty. And ever since then, not just about the war,
right?
You also remember subsequent operations, all those people who made the growth of the Navy possible. So it's a cause for much celebration, some reflection, and bringing the Navy's role to the general public's notice, because we are called a silent service. We operate beyond the horizon, and these are opportunities for us to sort of interact,
right,
and connect with the people at large and with the Indians.
Right. So just before we start the history side of it, I want to understand, how would you say, how important is Navy in the growth of a country, sir?
It is very much, and I'm glad you asked me this, because on the one hand, as a part of the armed force, it is very much, it plays an important role in what you'd say defense and deterrence.
Right.
But the Navy, because of its peculiarity, has lots of other roles which are very, very important from the point of both nation building and global peace. And I'll illustrate 3 or 4 of them. One is, please remember that in an interconnected world, trade is the lifeblood of economy.
True, very true.
And more than 90% of our trade happens through the seas. So therefore, if you want national prosperity, you must have secure seas. And remember, ensuring that your trade is safe is one of the biggest but least known or unsung roles of the Navy. Okay? So ensuring that your trade comes safe, ensuring your energy security. Please remember that almost all our oil or energy flows, whether imports or the exports of refined products, happens through seas. More than 90% of our energy security, whether oil or LNG, is through the seas.
Yes.
Again, it's the Indian Navy that is ensuring, the security of your energy, So these are some important ways where you are contributing directly to the economy. Second, please remember that because the sea is a multilateral medium, the Navy has an important diplomatic role. Without disrespect to the other services, they do a great job. But at sea, you can showcase, because there is calibration of power. I mean, Navy is the best vehicle to send to another country. The soft power is shown through the people. The hard power is shown through the ship or the flotilla itself. So it's organically you're showcasing the smart power of a nation when you send a ship, to another country. When naval ships take part in humanitarian assistance and disaster missions internationally, you are earning certain global equities. And India has been doing a fantastic job in the Indian Ocean in that regard, as the first responder, as a preferred security partner. Most of maritime security challenges in the globe need collaborative work.
True.
Because when you talk of illegal fishing, smuggling, gun running, piracy, all of these are multiple country efforts.
Yeah.
Again, India by playing a lead role there. So what one is trying to say is that economy, diplomacy, security, these, and because it's a international medium, so Indian Navy has been playing a lead role in catalyzing lots of international partnerships at sea. Indian Ocean Naval Symposium, or our Information Fusion Center, which we have in Gurugram, which is fantastic and world renowned. The third, please remember, is also in terms of ocean ecology and science and technology, because at the end of the day, the vast oceanic area, today your EEZ is 2.1, 2.2 million square kilometers, which is 2/3 of your land area.
Yeah.
Okay. Tomorrow, if that continental shelf principle is accepted, your ocean area is going to become 3 million square kilometers, which is the same as your land area. Now, on land, you have the army, the BSF, the CRPF, the people, the forest service, the police, a lot of people. At sea, it is a navy principally and the Coast Guard that does not just defense, but also policing, constabulary, collaborative security, everything. So whether it is studying the weather phenomena and meteorological, the naval ships do that and constantly give data back. Whether it is preservation of ocean ecology by driving away smugglers, by taking, action against those who pollute and all that, is the seaborne services, the Navy and Coast Guard, that have a big role in this. So I think by the virtue, by the nature it is made, the Navy does much more than the
True.
defense of the nation. And science and technology, ecology, economy, diplomacy are many areas where the Navy contributes directly or indirectly.
True. I also think, just to add to what you said, the technological advancements such as the incoming of drones would really help the Navy in improving the process and the security aspect of it as well.
Hugely. Because remember, again, the nature of war at sea is that you rarely fight within visual sight. Unlike what might happen sometimes on land, of course, air is also now similar to the sea. You are fighting beyond the horizon.
True.
So if you're fighting beyond the horizon, technology always plays an important role, because your ultimate job or ultimate objective is ordnance on target.
Right.
How do I hit the enemy before he hits me? Okay. So technology has to be a big enabler there.
Right.
Therefore, navies traditionally are capital intensive, technology intensive, and from beginning, they have had technology has been a major enabler of naval operations.
We'll speak about it later.
Absolutely.
But let's just go back in history. So at the moment, the kind of perception people have about Navy is that it was just post-colonization is when our Navy was formed. But we don't realize our rich maritime past and history that we had from ancient to medieval to even pre-colonized part. So I would like to divide our conversation today, and I would like this conversation to be something which just enables people to be more understanding of what our maritime history was. We would like you to cover the ancient, the medieval, the colonial past, and as well the modern, which we were speaking about just now. Let's start with the ancient, which mostly covers the Harappan civilization and talks a lot about the Vedic era of our maritime history. So do you want to put some light on it, sir?
Yeah. I mean, there is now, I think, a fair bit of understanding amongst most historians that India has had a glorious maritime heritage, a maritime past. And that, depending on how you date, goes back to about 2500 BCE, which is about 4,500 years. Because Lothal, which is the world's oldest tidal dock, is in India. Near Gujarat, near Ahmedabad in Gujarat. Incidentally, that's where a magnificent maritime museum is coming up over the next couple of years. We could talk about that more later if you want. So, essentially, you begin with a people or a country that has had maritime orientation and maritime exchanges right from the Harappan times. So, or as it is called, the Sindhu Saraswati time, and they had exchanges then with people
Trade.
in trade with people, Arabs. I've written an article called Between Melua and Magan. Magan is the coast of Oman, modern coast of Oman, but they had exchanges with people in the Persian Gulf, with people in the Oman coast. Whether they sailed directly by sea or they went coasting it can be further delineated, but it still doesn't take away or detract from the fact that they were seafarers who went and did adventurous things. Now, interestingly, by the time you come into 1st, 2nd century before Christ, there is enough evidence indicating lots of exchange with Roman Greece. Now, remember, Roman Greece were in the Mediterranean. There was no Suez Canal then, which meant that from Indian ports, they went to ports, modern ports in Red Sea, modern Egypt and Sudan. And from there, they went by the land route or through the Nile. And then again, they went by the sea on to Rome and Greece. But such was the importance of that exchange. It is said that annually at one point of time, ships with goods for Rome, there used to be more than 100 ships in Indian ports annually in the 1st century BC. And Romans imported so much of Indian stuff, cotton, textiles, spices, and they used to pay for it with gold and silver coins, that their own statesmen, Pliny the Elder, for example, bemoaning that our money is going away because of our, excessive taste of our nobles for luxuries. मतलब ये हो रहा था कि all that money from Rome, was coming into India, which is why scientific evidence recently is indicating, or archaeological, that outside of Mediterranean, most Roman coins have been found in excavations in India. Now, obviously, these are for archaeologists and all to determine. But the point is, before even the Common Era or the Christian era started, much of India in the West Coast and then later in the East Coast, subsequently in the East Coast, had been having exchanges. So today, what you call as the Indo-Pacific, stretching from East African coast and West coast of the Arab coast and Persian Gulf, going right up to Japan and Korea and China in the East, was an area of trade in which India occupied the central position geographically, but also as an important entry port. Stuff used to come from West and travel from there to East and vice versa. Right. Now, this kind of segued later, what we call, so you have someone like the Satavahanas, who are great seafarers, who are from 2nd century BC to 2nd century Christian era. So 4 centuries there. There were the early Cholas. There were other kingdoms that came in, the Pallavas, the Pandyas, the Cheras, the Satavahanas, the Shilaharas. So there is no, later on the Vijayanagaras, the Chalukyas before them in the 6th century and all that. So all 7th century, sorry. So all of them were having certain maritime exchanges. So if you can say right up to the Cholas in the 10th and 11th century, there was continuous and continuing with little bit of this one, with several ports in different parts of India. So on the west coast, you had Bharuch, you had Surat, you had Cambay, you had Mandogra on the Konkan coast, you had Muziris down below. In the east, you had Kaveri Patnam, Pumpuhar, you had Tamluk or Tamralipti in West Bengal. So you had a lot of these places having continuous exchanges with their counterparts in both east and west. And trade, the east also had, I would believe, much greater involvement of the kingdoms. So what happened is, that is how not just trade but Indian architecture went. Today if you have lots of temples in Southeast Asia, if you have the Angkor Wat and Champa and all those, certainly people who went there, they were craftsmen, they were architects. Now my point, Shivam, in this is, I'm not a cultural or religious expert. And of course, Hinduism and Buddhism traveled then by the seas. I mean, William Dalrymple's latest book, which is what many have said before also, but Dalrymple is a very good storyteller, so it says that right from the 2nd or 3rd century BC until the 12th or 13th century, that means you're talking of 1,000+ years. It says ancient India was the ideas generator, was the wealth generator, was the trade generator. We were to that time what perhaps, Europe or USR or where, as a fulcrum of ideas and commerce and everything else. But to come back, my point is, I'm not a cultural or religious historian. I have some understanding. I look at it through the maritime, and this is important. See, all of these exchanges would not have happened if you didn't have the maritime vector. All of this went, my argument is, this happened on ships. Now, ships, if they go and come and there is frequent trade and transportation, it cannot happen without nautical knowledge, right? If you don't know the currents, the winds, the waves, the tides, navigation, knowledge of different ports.
Shipbuilding.
Second, shipbuilding. You had to have shipbuilding. You couldn't have imported ships from other parts. You might have taken ideas, they might have taken yours. It's different.
And steel wasn't there.
So you built from wood, you built from sails, okay? So, shipbuilding, nautical knowledge. Third and most important, remember, safety and return on investment. You tell a traveler or a trader, come, let's go and do business in Vietnam. Whether aaj ya kal agar aap bolo one-way ticket, he will not come, right? The time taken may have been more. Today you may go and do business in 1 week and come back. That time it would have taken you 6 months, 1 year. But safety and return on investment was always necessary then as it is now. So none of this would have been possible if India did not have a very good maritime base consisting of seafarers, nautical knowledge, shipbuilding, maritime safety and security. So that is my central argument.
So what do you think this understanding comes from, though? Like,
it comes from knowledge of seas. It comes from good exchanges. It comes from good practices and a cosmopolitan world where you exchanged ideas along with wealth and other things. It comes from all that. But it comes from a strong internal basis where you had trade and kingdoms backing. आपको जो finance चाहिए, आपको ये चाहिए. Often temples were supposed to be, having stakeholdership.
Investing in the project.
Investing in the projects. What Europe did later with Columbus and Vasco da Gama was in some ways happening. I mean, here the desire was not colonialism, but it was to enhance trade, it was to have exchanges. But there was investment by the elites of the society into maritime exchanges. And that made this possible.
So what is more fascinating is the understanding of, for example, the wood to use, how to navigate. Even so, what I'm trying to say is the evolution has been so strong before that, before they started doing it. I'm sure there must be a lot of hit and tries, and there must be a lot of evolution of trying of what kind of wood to use.
Of course.
How to navigate through the stars.
Yes.
And so on.
True. Yes, the monsoon pattern of winds was predictable, which helped you determine when to go and when to come. But you are crossing oceans, at least in the east. If you have to go from, east coast of India to hit Southeast Asia, other than having Nicobar Island a little on the way to raise it, you have miles and miles of sea.
Nothing, yes.
Nothing. So to have done that in those times, when the rest of the world was barely probably, moving around a little bit, foraying just close to their coast, I think is remarkable, because you had these exchanges. Now, I'm not suggesting that Indians were alone. The Chinese were there, the Arabs were there, So it was a very good exchange. But India certainly had a lot of maritime mojo, if I can call that, which made all of these possible. So it was professional knowledge and efficiency, but also compassionate and understanding state involvement.
Right.
You know?
Do you think the strength from this period was transferred in the Chola dynasty as well, sir?
Absolutely. The Chola dynasty in some ways was the very, very peak, the zenith, you can say, of all that had been there before. Because in the two, and now we're talking of the later Cholas of the 10th and 11th centuries, in the two Chola rulers, the Rajaraja and Rajendra Chola, you had direct involvement of the king and a far-reaching king. Now, both of them, went far, the earlier one to Sri Lanka, to Maldives and all, Rajaraja, and Rajendra to the Srivijaya in Indonesia. Okay. And they won the battles there. With Srivijaya, it was not conquest, it was issue about a tax dispute, trade dispute, but it was settled through war,
Yeah.
And certainly the Cholas prevailed and they won it. And it's something, mind you, 1025, it is 1000 years of that next year, is something we ought to be proud about. It doesn't mean that we, remember at the end of the days that even the Srivijayas belonging to the Shailendras had very strong Buddhist roots, and they actually sponsored a lot of Buddhist viharas in the Chola, in the South Indian kingdom. But the moot point is that to come back to the Cholas, they reportedly had a huge fleet. They had, and when you say fleet, of course, they may not have been designated warships, because those days you still fought with hands. You took soldiers across, so there had to be multi-purpose ship. You had not yet reached the age of cannon, so there are some remarks that they were, flamethrowers and swords, catapults. But the moot point is that you had ships that could go far. You had ships that could take a lot of soldiers. After all, if you have to fight, you will take certain amount of soldiers, 1,000, 5,000, 10,000, 20,000, assuming that one ship will take, let's say, 200 or 300 soldiers.
But you'll also have to take shipbuilders with them.
You have to take mechanicians, you have to take mariners. So to send an army of 10,000, you would have to send some 30 or 40 ships. So it means that they had a flotilla. I'm not putting numbers, whether in number of, again, I'm not an expert specifically on the Cholas, but it is logical to deduce that there was a great degree of maritime enterprise, that to be able to send an army across the seas or a navy across the seas, you need a certain amount of strength. So if you have to send 30, 40 ships flotilla, the knowledge required, this one to go, and the will to fight after crossing all that distance, to fight and win and come back with the treasures. So I think it talks something. It's a remarkable epoch in Indian history. I'm not saying we need to be very triumphal about it, but it's very remarkable epoch. We got to be justly proud about the exploits of the Cholas, because everything. And this is also the time, remember, the Brihadeshwara temple was built, temple architecture. Rajendra Chola goes north, he defeats the Palas of Bengal, gets the waters of Ganga and calls himself the Gangai Kondam Cholapuram. So he builds a new capital. So there is high noon of music, architecture, art, everything comes in at the spirit. So I would say the Cholas were in many ways the zenith of India's maritime excellence, and after that, over a century or two, it declined. And then, of course, if you want, we can come into the next phase of the Marathas and colonials. We are still talking.
So until then, sir, until now, the ships were moving because of the winds, is what you were trying to say as well.
Yeah. They're moving. In fact, the wind thing happened for another 6-7 centuries before. Sails, on sails. But the colonial era brought in the cannon and gun and fighting with the cannon and gun. Before that, during the Cholas time and all, there was no cannon. So there was no standoff. You didn't fire from a cannon. Your ships went and either rammed other ships, and then your soldiers embarked their ships, or if they were at anchorage, you got into smaller boats and you moved. But essentially, you fought with soldiers with sword, spear, shield, and all that. They were army soldiers or marines fighting. But if they have to take sea travel of so many days, then they also had to have abilities to overcome seasickness, ability to stay fit at sea, ability to exercise at sea, ability to practice. So they were, you can call them a sort of marines,
Right. Right. Now let's move towards a little more ahead, where we were the medieval period when
Yeah.
we were interacting with the Arabs, the
Yeah,
Chinese,
yeah.
and then a little bit of Europeans as well, because it was just when Vasco da Gama
Yeah.
found.
Yeah, I'll try and cover this, as quickly or as briefly as possible. So essentially, many people put it sometime in 13th or 14th century. There was a kind of decline in India's maritime prowess. Now, why that happened? Is it just the march of history? Were there other reasons? I mean, there are certain speculations. One is that, the Islamic rulers who came to India didn't have much of maritime this one. Again, this is not so much about Islam because the Arabs were good seafarers. But, the people who came into India, whether they were Turks, the Afghans, and this one, they didn't have much of seafaring instinct. That could be one reason. People speculate that pandemic or something happened which forced people to stay away from the sea. The other is that people say you are self-sufficient internally, So there could be certain reasons, but by the 13th century, slowly there was a turning of back to the seas.
Okay.
And by 14th or 15th centuries, now this is the time when the Arabs took over the trade. It didn't really matter much because Arabs at that time, history indicates there were no major conflict or fights they had with Indians. They took the trade, but trade continued. The problem happened when the colonials came towards the end of the 15th century. Vasco da Gama came in 1498, okay? And very soon, within 10 years, by 1509, 1510, they established their first colony in Goa, and then they started spreading, and encouraged by them, the other colonials came, and we know the history of colonialism. Now, what the important thing that the colonials brought in are two or three. It is one of those coincidences of history or whatever that they started looking into the sea and exploring the seas as we started receding. And when we say we, not just India, China also, which was a great seafaring nation, after the last voyage of Tunga or Zhenghe in 1432, 1433, they also locked their ship, shut down their navy, and just sort of stopped looking towards the
Why
seas.
would you say that was?
Again, there are
Multiple
reasons, including the fact that, there were probably internal political intrigues. I'm not getting... Zhenghe died in that voyage, so also probably the lack of a charismatic admiral. But I've not studied their history enough to speculate on the reason. But interesting that they too shut shop very soon by the second half of the 15th century. So you have the Europeans going out, and once Constantinople or Istanbul fell in 1454, and the route, through the Mediterranean, which was now the Turks started demanding more money, more taxes on the spices that came from India. They had to find a sea route. So there was both a commercial incentive, there was a religious incentive about spreading Christianity all over the world, but they started exploring the seas much more. Again, my view is the maritime. So the greater maritime exploration in the West happened as East was declining. So ultimately these people came, and now remember, all the way coming from there, of course they were helped by a lot of Indian seafarers, particularly Vasco da Gama was navigated from Malindi in Kenya, modern Kenya, to Calicut by an Indian navigator or an Arab navigator. The jury is out on that, by a gentleman named Ibn Majid. Now Ibn Majid, even if he's an Arab, apparently he was called the Moor of Gujarat because he spent a lot of time in India. Now that gentleman supposedly navigated Vasco da Gama because he didn't know the way from Malindi to India across the seas. But be that whatever it is, they came all the way from Europe to India. And once they learned the ropes, they learned it well and they didn't go back. Now they brought in the concept of seas to be controlled the use of sea to be taxed. Until then, the seas was open, highway, anyone could use it, like today's internet. What these people did is, they brought in to say that if you use the seas and for trade, you must pay money to us because we control these seas. You know, and to show their sea control, they had gunpowder, now which Indians were, lacking at that point.
These are Portuguese you're talking about.
The Portuguese to begin with. And they to spread shock and awe, whatever, they're very terrible. They treated, anyone who disobeyed them, they be extremely cruel. Okay, cut their nose, cut their ears, smash their faces, send this one back. So they spread dar.
Yeah.
And they changed the complete paradigm of the oceans from being open to everyone to now being determined that who will run the ocean. And they would have a license called cartas, and people had to take the Portuguese cartas, obviously paying a huge amount of money to trade. So whether it was the Mughals, the Vijayanagaras, this one, people had to, or other kingdoms, had to take cartas from the Portuguese. So what India was forgetting was that even as people were firm on land, we were losing control over the seas. The Mughals, for example, were ruling over the land. But the sea was going outside of their control. And then, as the Portuguese came to be replaced by the British and all, more or less the same model with slight variations happened. Now, did it mean that India's seafaring abilities completely vanished? Not at all. Or resistance, heroic resistance. The family, the Kunnali Marakkars of the Malabar coast, they fought hard almost for 100 years against the Portuguese, So till the last of the Marakkar was towards the end of, around 1600 or 1599, I think, he died. I mean, he was betrayed by the Indians to the Portuguese and they beheaded him. They fought valiantly. There was Rani Abbakka in Ullal in Karnataka, today's, near Mangalore, who stood up to the Portuguese for almost 15 years and gave a brave fight and remained undefeated. And above all, the Marathas. The Marathas are another glorious chapter, like the Cholas were at their time. Marathas are another glorious chapter during the colonial times. Between Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj and then later Sarkhel Kanhoji Angre, you have this fantastic case of an entity, an empire, a kingdom, standing up against the colonials and saying, no, we will not yield. And Sarkhel Kanhoji Angre did not lose any battle against the Europeans. And most importantly, not just lose, he said, to hell with your kartas, I will start giving my passes, dastak and call, and you must take license from me if you have to trade. Now this is great. This is rock star, because he was challenging the concepts of sovereignty and supremacy on the sea, not just fighting them on battles. So I think the Marathas, again, resistance. So that until about 1755-56, when ultimately the Marathas were overcome. Again, because of little weaknesses in the Indian, this one, not so much because they were lesser at seafaring. So essentially, the Marathas put up a great fight. So even the colonial era, the colonials prevailed, but there were great acts of resistance. And after that, then, as the colonial era started also, the Indians, one is the Wadia shipbuilders from the middle of 18th century, built some fantastic ships, mostly for the British, built some fantastic ships, many of whom did very well in subsequent wars. And one of them, the second oldest ship in commission, called the HMS Trincomalee, is still afloat in UK, in Hartlepool in the United Kingdom, 18 ka, so it's more 1818, about more than 200 years old. It's still afloat. So Indian shipbuilding through the Wadias. And then, of course, the Indian Navy at that point of time derived, called the Royal Indian Navy, the Royal Indian Marine in World War One. Not too much activity, little bit. But the Royal Indian Navy in World War II gave an excellent account of themselves. Even though they were a small service, gave a very good account. So overall, even though the political power had moved away, our own, let's say, connect with the sea or sea fighting abilities, while largely curbed, I think there were still enough instances to show the Indians that we are never removed from the sea.
So you're saying there wasn't a massive decline?
See, there was a decline because of funding. There was a decline because political power moved to Britain. There was a decline because they took control of all the administrative and other mechanisms. But the basic Indian continued to stand up against the British whenever it was, like the Marathas and Marakkars. And even those who fought with the British later or on the side of the British showcased their seafaring, sea fighting abilities and maritime savvy, even within the restricted construct.
So would you say, were there any Indian mariners who had gone to another region for conquest?
See, not for conquest.
But we've been always gone for trade.
Not for conquest, for trade. That is why I'm saying, by the time the colonials came, probably not, because you had turned your backs. But it is entirely possible that until from about, like you say, from about 2nd or 3rd century BC or before that, until the 10th, 11th century, it's possible that Indian traders, Indian people and Indian explorers may have gone. We don't know. One of the big problems in India is lack of sources before 1500, AD. So it is possible that much of literature, much of these accounts may not be there. Again, I'm not an expert on those era, but pure logic will tell us that if you were seafaring, if you had maritime exchanges, there would have been an Indian inquisitive mind like a Marco Polo or like a Fayan or like an Alberoni or Ibn Battuta. I would think that there might have been some Indian curious minds going and exploring elsewhere.
True.
But we don't know about the source, so I don't want to venture an opinion on that.
So, sir, is it fair to say that all these European colonizers, their aim was to look for India just because for trade, and it was just the race to reach India for spices, and that's what it started as well?
Yeah, that was, of course, the basic reason. Spices was always there, or in a larger sense, trade, because textiles, other things were there. And it used to come even before by this half sea, half land route that I have said. Red Sea, ports in Sudan and Egypt of today, Bernike, Hormuz, and then from there go on to the Mediterranean. But when the Turks took over, as I said, in 1454, Istanbul or Constantinople, they started levying heavy taxes. The Europeans were finding it very difficult. So their original intent was certainly trade. But they were also interested in conversion, missionaries, because both the Portuguese and the Spaniards had very strong backing from the church, the Pope, and they were interested. In fact, they thought that a lot of people in India were practicing Christianity, and they went in search of a mythical guy called Prester John, who was supposed to be in the East, who was, a sort of Christian person here, spreading the message of Christianity. So they actually thought, in fact, some of their early recollections when they came here, they thought that Indians were worshippers of Christ and Mary, but in a different way. It's only later they realized that ye nahi hai. So then there was also desire to convert to Christianity, people. And after a while, the desire for conquest started. particularly when they saw that they could conquer, and take over. And over a period of time, then that became a big thing too.
Right. A little bit about pre-independence era, where you mentioned a little bit about World War One and World War Two, where our presence was more on World War Two. How did we, as Indian, the Royal Navy was significant in the World War Two? So
See, what happened is, in some ways, the Indian Navy, from the British point of view, came to be started as they look at it in 1612 when the British squadron came here, and over next 3-4 centuries it took different avatars. I'll not go into that. But let's begin with the last century. At World War One time, you had what was called the Royal Indian Marine, which did small little jobs, basically troop transportation, coastal protection, lighthouse protection, and all that sort of thing. There was a realization after that you needed to expand it, and so there was up and down for the next couple of decades till World War II came. Now in 1934, 2nd of October 1934, the Royal Indian Navy was set up. And it was a very small service because the British were very clear that this will be only for coastal defense. Major जो Indian Ocean में हम ही कार्रवाई संभालेंगे. Because they were very clear that as the rulers of the ocean, it was the Royal Navy and not the Royal Indian Navy that had to be this one. So the Royal Indian Navy was started as a very small entity, less than 2,000 people. And it continued until 1939 that way. Once World War II started and the responsibilities for the Royal Navy and Britain happened much more in the Atlantic and Pacific, they expanded this service hugely. So, at its peak, this thing went from 2,000 people to 30,000 people. Officers, sailors, ships, idhar, udhar, many repurposed, some built in a hurry, some built in India, in Indian shipyard. So the Royal Indian Navy expanded in a big way. And they then started playing a significant role in operations in the Indian Ocean. And of course, some of Royal Indian Navy ships were also involved in the Atlantic, some in the Pacific, mostly in the Indian Ocean, in Persian Gulf area, in today's, Eritrea, Somalia and all that, because you're fighting the Italians, Germans. Then later on in the Burma campaign, in landing a lot of amphibious troops. So they did some sterling work. And this is even then a very small navy, because your biggest ship was just about 1,000 tons. You didn't have submarines, you didn't have aircraft carrier. So it was a surface navy. And Indian officers were very few. They were just starting to become lieutenants and lieutenant commanders. I mean, sailors were substantially Indian, but very few officers. And this service gave a great account of itself in all the theatres of the war. The CNC Royal Indian Navy, Admiral Fitzherbert, who was a Britisher, he said there's been the highest standards of the British have been met. And, about 6-7 ships sank, some people died. We had lots of gallantry awards. In particular, a ship called HMIS Bengal, which was about 1,000 tons or lesser, actually defeated and, overcame 2 Japanese ships, destroyers, that was 10 times bigger than her. So Bengal was given a royal reception when she came back to Bombay. So there were sterling acts by the Royal Indian Navy ships in World War II, which led to a recognition of the role that they played.
Right.
Which is why we were there when the Victory Day parade happened in UK. Some of the Indian ships were there when the surrender happened in Japan. So all, I would say, Indians, were there when surrender happened in Japan. So all in all, it was a nice, later on as a Commonwealth occupation force in terms of stabilizing there, some of the Indian ships went. So all in all, it was a very remarkable performance put up by the Royal Indian Navy.
Right.
Despite the small size and expansion. Can you imagine if you suddenly expand? That means you are training during the war. You are taking civilians and training them and putting them in the war theatre in 3 months, 6 months. They did remarkably.
It's good to hear that the strength was there, even though there was a decline in the maritime knowledge, the transfer from our ancient roots. And while there was a decline of Indian shipbuilding, in indigenous shipbuilding, and a lot of traditions from our maritime history. Is it because of the colonial policies that there were?
Yes, of course. See, you have to look at colonials both ways. At one level, at that time, the British were the best and biggest navy in the world. And certainly some of the knowledge that they imparted, technology-wise, framework-wise, what we call staff work and the design of the navy, you took in from them. But did they care much about your ancient maritime tradition? No. I mean, they always looked and tried to tell the Indians that you didn't have any seafaring till we came, sort of thing. That used to be. So, in fact, I'm glad you asked this question, because some of these attributes, I mean, the war was well fought and it was taken, but some of these attributes of latent superiority, racial, ideas of superiority, discrimination against the Indians, all that led, in 45 you win a war. In February 1946, less than a year ago, you have this entire navy rising up to revolt against the British, which is called the famous naval uprising. In less than a year after the end of war, 20,000 of these sailors and almost 100 ships and establishments rose in revolt against the British, and all across all naval stations, Karachi, Bombay, Kochi, Jamnagar, Visakhapatnam, Calcutta. So some of that was, of course, influenced, or most of that was influenced by the politics of the day, INA and all that. But it was also influenced by the behavior of the British. So yes, many Brits were good. We fought together. But, I mean, they were not necessarily the biggest fans of Indian maritime thought or tradition or past.
So would you say this was the lowest point of our maritime culture, India's maritime culture?
Look, I would not say that, because in some ways being colonized is a low point for any country, any time. And that might have prevailed in all fields. I think our maritime decline actually begins in the 13th, 14th century. And it goes through, right, for example, through the Mughal times and all that. It is there. In some ways, the British would claim that there was actually a revival. They revived, the Wadia shipbuilders, our performance in war, giving the Indian Navy its current configuration and formulation. So I wouldn't necessarily call the colonial period the lowest period. You learned from them. People who fought in the war took that experience in building a post-war navy. But I'm trying to suggest that the way and manner in which they went about doing also gave an impetus for decolonization.
True. So now let's come to the post-independence era, where we had, we had a lot of the Royal Navy ships at that time, which we inherited. And we could see this as a revival also of our maritime knowledge and culture and maritime power that we were before. So what would you do differently if you were in that point of time, and how could India have done differently in terms of reviving it better?
No, I think as far as Navy was concerned, we had a brilliant set of people. I wouldn't do anything different seen from the Navy's point of view. As a nation, whether we should have prioritized the Navy more is a question that needs to be asked, because we did not prioritize the Navy after independence. Of course, there could be genuine reasons. Your challenges were landward. We had various other challenges, including social, economic, political. I completely take the point. But I think the naval leadership was fantastically ambitious and good. Please remember, within 10 days after independence, we formulated the first plans paper, and that was in 1947. That was refined in 1948. And what did the Indian Navy's planners see for themselves? They wanted a Navy which had aircraft carriers. They wanted a Navy which had big surface ships, cruisers. They wanted a Navy which had submarines. We had none of these. lot of people would have laughed at our ambition and say, "Yaar, you have been a kid now. Suddenly you want to grow gradually, evolve." But the Indian Navy's plans, people and the pioneers had remarkably amazing ideas about where they should reach. They didn't reach it in that time frame, but their vision was clear. Secondly, they were also pragmatic. You realize that you can't immediately start building in India. You realize you may not be able to buy new ships straight away because you bought in second-hand ships. You brought in ships from UK. But when you brought in INS Delhi, the first big ship, a cruiser from the Brits, it was at about 7,500, 8,000 tons, about 8-9 times heavier than any ship you had. Your biggest ship until then was 1,000 tons too. The Mysore that you brought about 10 years later was about 9,500, 10,000 tons. We bought the aircraft carrier in 1961, 14 years after independence. I mean, at independence we had nothing. Within 14 years we were wanting to be a carrier navy. So I think it was remarkable. I mean, you can have certain points of view about whether the carrier was necessary then or not. I mean, I believe it was, but that's a separate debate. I think there was, from the naval planners' point of view, there was a remarkable ambition, there was great vision, and they set about doing it. And they were pragmatic.
Any particular leaders that comes to your mind?
Absolutely, lots. Some of our, we had Admiral Katari. The first few naval chiefs, though Admiral Katari took over as the chief only in 1958. For first few years we had British chiefs because we're not adequately have people of that seniority, but I'll not cover them. They were good. They did certain good for the country. But if you want to talk of Indian chiefs, Admiral Katari, the first Indian naval chief who had the task of now homogenize, setting the pace. Admiral Soman, who followed him, a big fan of indigenization. Admiral Adhar Chatterjee was the man who had done the plans paper. One of the finest visionaries, great thinking, intellectual officer. During his time, the Navy's, 66 to 70, the Navy's fleet levels went up amazingly. And when the British stopped giving us, we went to the Russians. We started building in India in 1960 with a small ship. By late 60s, we had laid the keel for our own indigenous frigate, the Nilgiri, which came in 70s. Admiral Nanda, who followed Chatterjee, great ambition, the man who bombed Karachi as he describes, but who wanted that Navy should have a say in war and all that, disappointed after 65. So the Navy had some outstanding leaders. You had leaders, apart from these gentlemen, there was Admiral Karmarkar, Admiral Chakravarti, Admiral Sampson. Then you had in the technical, Admiral Dayashankar, Admiral, Commodore Baswan, Admiral Pereira. So I'm trying to say that why I'm bringing out these names is, हम आज किसी को पूछते हैं कि भाई 71 वॉर में आर्मी चीफ कौन था, एवरीवन विल से सैम मैनेक्शॉ. बट आप पूछो नेवी का चीफ कौन था, नो वन नोज. बट एडमिरल नंदा, एंड टेकिंग नथिंग अवे फ्रॉम द ग्रेट सैम बहादुर, but Admiral Nanda deserves some recognition for the way he led Navy in 71 war and the people who built the Navy. Just as Homi Bhabha built, the atomic energy, Vikram Sarabhai built in space, Rajaramanna and others who built in other endeavors, or Swaminathan in agriculture, Satish Dhawan in space, all that. They are people we know and we respect hugely, and we must. So my argument is the Indian Navy was built by a silent bunch of people. So at independence, you were nowhere. And today, 75 years later, you are one of the top navies in the world. How did this happen? Because many people worked. And this is the first set. I mean, they were followed by equally remarkable, what I call 1.5 generation or 2 generation, Admiral Ronnie Pereira, Admiral Kirpal Singh, Admiral Manohar Avati, Admiral Mickey Roy, Admiral Barboza. I mean, these were all a splendid cast of characters. Admiral Swaraj Prakash, people who gave up their lives in 71 war, Captain M.N. Malla, the other Mahavir Chakras of the war like Mohan Narayan Rao Samant, Babru Bhan Yadav, So we had this fantastic, splendid cast of characters in the Navy who built the Navy, who made it good in war, made indigenization the cornerstone, brought in infusion of science and technology, adapted to the British first and the Russians later. यार ये सब नहीं होता अगर
there were no visionaries.
There was no visionaries, there were no people, and fantastic team.
So since you spoke about 1971 and 72 war, what was the role of the Indian Navy in the war? So if you want to put some light for the audience.
Like I explained in the beginning, but essentially remember that the role of the Navy in this war was, fortunately, since there had been certain time to prepare, the Navy was very clear about what it wanted to do. The background to this war happens in 65. In 65, the Navy was not allowed by the authorities of the day, by the government, to operate north of Porbandar. Whatever reasons. And Pakistan came and did a sneak gun attack on Dwarka in September, and they started claiming a lot of credit for that. It achieved no great results, it didn't kill anyone, it caused no damage. But it led to a lot of questions in India, mostly ill-informed, कि Navy क्या कर रही थी, this, that. No? So they were not aware that Navy had not been made a part of the overall war plans for a long time. But because of that episode, many people in the Navy felt, this is not correct. We've been deprived of action. So if and when a next opportunity comes, the Navy must be geared to deliver a decisive blow against the opposition. So that was the determination, and 71 war made that possible because you had time to prepare. So Admiral Nanda and all were very clear. What were the Navy's aims? First and foremost, remember geography. You had West Pakistan, you had East Pakistan separated. The air route was cut much before. The only way West could, reinforce East was through the sea. आपको logistic support भेजना है, लोग भेजना है, tanks भेजना है, military भेजना है. It had to go through the sea. Merchant ships bringing stuff from West or from other parts of the world, grain ho, ye ho, wo ho, supplies ho, had to be from the sea. So the Navy was very clinical and precise that it would cut all these sea routes, not just from West to East, that of course, so there's no reinforcement, but choke East completely so that no damn merchant ship or anything comes there. So that it is choked, strangulated, and ultimately is paralyzed. So that was Navy's number one objective, which it did fantastically. The other objective was, through offensive action, take control immediately, and which it did. First attack on 4th, both in East and West. In West, Bay of Bengal, from the aircraft carrier, Chittagong, Khulna, Chalna, Mongla, all that, bombarded. And in the West, that was in the East. In the West, Karachi attacks on the 4th. So on 4th, you had 3 ships launch an attack, several ships off Karachi were destroyed. The refinery was set on fire. You came back. You did another attack on 8th December, completely set the refinery on fire, took out some more ships. After 8th, Pakistan surface force was not able to fight at all. There was nobody there to fight. Effectively, and all merchant ships coming into Karachi now were taking permission from Indian Navy to come in and be there. So you established control, and through offensive action, you delivered a knockout blow to the Pakistan. So you made it thus possible. Of course, we also deployed our submarines while they did not come into action. Remember that we had brought our submarine just 3 years before. So the act of deploying submarines and all taught us a lot in terms of operationally how to do it. We put our aircraft carrier Vikrant into play in the East. We trained the water wing of the Mukti Bahini, the Bangladesh people, to swim and do subversive operations underwater, which was another remarkable effort. So collectively, we contributed to the final outcome in a very, very decisive way.
Right. So, how are we in place today in terms of producing our own ships and indigenization? And are we in a good position to make our own ships, our aircraft carriers, our submarines? Or
Of course, and we've been doing that. Like I said, this journey began in 1960. We produced a small ship called INS Ajay. From there, it has been relentless making in India by the Indian Navy. Long before, it became a mantra elsewhere. We adopted and adapted to that. Also, sometimes because our funding was less. But we put faith in the indigenous people, in the indigenous ecosystem. So today, we are building aircraft carriers. We built the INS Vikrant. 2 years back, it was commissioned. Aircraft carrier is a holy grail, the highest in, we have sent a rocket to moon and we are proud of it. Justly, Chandrayaan, we should be very proud. But I'll tell you that building an aircraft carrier is in the same category of, achievement, which we did 2 years ago. We built a nuclear submarine. We have laid the keel for more nuclear submarines. So you're building submarines, you're building aircraft carrier, and surface ship, we are producing them with great regularity. In fact, while I don't have the exact statistics, I understand that out of 65 ships being built over the next few years, 63 are being built in India. Only 2 abroad. So that's remarkable. So as far as Indian Navy is concerned, it's almost building everything in India. Some of the items and weapons may be imported, but building everything in India. So it is designed by the Naval Design Bureau. It's also, remember, it means that a great fillip, for example, to making warship grade steel, producing warship grade steel in India, producing the sort of paints and other material that you need for warships. The small and medium industries get a great fillip out of what you can. So, and over a period of time, whether it is auxiliary machinery, tubes, pipes, radars, electronic systems, communication systems, many of them have been built in India.
Right.
And they give a huge fillip to your industrial manufacturing ecosystem for the defense.
Right.
So I think the Navy is clearly, again, with no disrespect to the Army and Air Force, I think everyone will agree that Navy is a clear leader as far as making in India is concerned. And I'll tell you an interesting story about this, how this leads to some very interesting, let's say, journeys and movements. 2 examples, if I can give you. There is a gentleman called Dr. Arogyaswamy Paul Raj, who's one of the, today, if you Google him, he's considered one of the finest scientists in the IT sector in the world. He's a professor emeritus at Stanford. He's a winner of a half a dozen global prizes. He's a distinguished person in the field of information technology and communications. Now, he is credited with the invention of a technique called MIMO, multiple input, multiple output, which is the heart of 4G and 5G. मतलब आपका 4G, 5G का जो ये चलता है, ये MIMO के, is the foundation of that. Now, Dr. Arogyaswamy Paul Raj is a retired Commodore of Indian Navy. So what am I saying? An Indian Navy Commodore has built one of the important components of 4G and 5G, which is an essential part of your smartphones. So if today we are using smartphones, we have to be thankful to this Indian gentleman. How many of us know of this name? We don't.
No one.
The important thing is his journey in science and technology started after we lost the Kukri in 1971 war. And we realized that the sonar of Kukri was made for British conditions. That was a British buy. So we needed a different sonar for warm water. And that is how then Captain or Commander Paul Raj was tasked to build an indigenous sonar for warm waters. He built one, delivered magnificently, And that led to his journey as a scientist. Similarly, one of our biggest designers of warships is a distinguished person called Captain Mohan Ram, who built warships, designed warships, and then moved to Mazgaon Dock. Then he moved to industry and corporate and TVS. And he's also the designer of TVS Scooty. So the person who designed some of the best indigenous ship is also a designer of the two vehicle that in some ways revolutionized, markets. So I'm trying to say, therefore, it is the Navy's science and technology ecosystem which has produced, and these are two, there are many more names, which has produced great pioneers in science and technology also.
Got it. So just to end our conversation, I want to bring a little current geopolitics. Currently, we see that Indian Ocean region has been an integral part in the current geopolitics. We see a lot of investment from the European countries, the US, and we are an important player in the Indian Ocean ourselves. But how can we, as a nation, counter China's rise in this region, sir?
There are bigger and better experts on China than I am, so I'll just attempt to answer this as best as I can. See, the issue is China is clearly a huge power. It's a big power. There is no doubting it. It's a rich country. It can afford to spend lots of money, and that is a big attraction, whether in building ships or state-of-the-art equipment, or in being able to have other countries as your friends, because money certainly has...
It's about trade these days.
Yes. That having been said, they've also been smart in the way they have reverse engineered technology from, the cutting-edge science systems elsewhere in the world to build their own ship, submarine, aircraft. They are ahead in a variety of scientific endeavors. I mean, of course, this should not lead us into believing that they are unbeatable or they are unfightable. We must go into 2 or 3 core issues. What do we need to do? We have to look after India's interests. India's interest is not to fight. It is to have a peaceful environment. To have a peaceful environment, we should be able to deter anyone who has evil designs on us. Which means I don't have to do bean counting कि अगर उसके पास 100 submarines हैं तो मेरे पास भी 100 submarine होना चाहिए उसके पास. What I should do is have adequate capabilities to deter. And I think India in the last few years, I mean, the recent hypersonic missile test, for example, long-range missiles, being able to have strategic ballistic submarines. All of these strategic level capacities and capabilities, which incorporate missiles, space, submarines, extended range, and obviously the nuclear aspects to it. I think cumulatively they signal highest deterrence at the strategic level. And I think we've been doing very well there. At the conventional level, I think the fact that after a long time, certain amount of disengagement or talks about disengagement is happening is because we took a resolute stand and we said we will not blink. We will be there. We will have our forces. We will mobilize if required, but will not give way. I think that showed determination. And if you see on land previously, whenever India has, whether it was in Nathula in 67 or Sumdorongchu in the mid-80s with General Sundarji, or with Dokla, or in the current cases post Galwan, when you have stood up and said, we will not step back, I think the resolution has been largely to our favor. Again, like I said, I don't want to unpack it. There are more experts in that. But the general sense I get is, for all their great shock and awe and seductive capabilities, they believe probably in Sun Tzu's theory of winning wars without fighting. If you actually tell him that, look, I'm capable of looking you in the eye and fighting, he might take a step back. The third thing is that, look, I'm saying this with no disrespect to the Chinese. When it comes to sea power, if they become the most preeminent navy in the world, it would probably be the first, I don't know, but a rare case of a navy that has become a global navy without actually having gone through a lot of fighting. You know, the US Navy became the world's #1 navy after its performance in the world wars and all that. Britain prevailed with its navy through a lot of its global conquests. I'm not suggesting that that should be the template. There are greater experts of navy than I am, but it to me seems rather strange, because then it is an untested navy. And navy is not judged solely by numbers. Numbers are important criteria, but the mere fact of having so many numbers may not mean much if you have not fought in a war.
No experience.
Yes, I'm not suggesting therefore that they will lose or something like that. But I'm saying that puts a certain bit of, let's say, question mark over fighting abilities, and I'm choosing my words carefully. I'm not for a moment suggesting that they'll be bad or they will lack it, but you are able to evaluate the other navies better from how they performed at sea in battles and conflicts and in pursuit of their national interests. I think the jury is out on that as far as China is concerned. We don't know how it. Now, again, I'm not saying directly that India is equipped to fight very well and all that. Yes, of course, we're equipped. We're good. We're a professional navy.
Countries look up to us.
Yeah, but the slate of our navy is more open in terms of what we did in the 71 war, in terms of what we have done in conflicts, skirmishes after that, whether it was Kargil, whether it was Parakram, whether it was Operational Pawan, whether it was Goa. They've been good and not so good episodes. We've learned. More importantly, we have produced documents like Maritime Strategy and Doctrine documents that are open to everyone for people to see how do we view our Navy. What is our own conception of the Navy?
Right.
Our officers do very, very well in courses abroad. And these are, fiercely competitive courses. They do extraordinarily well in these courses, and I'm sure, again, the word takes note. Similarly, when we have been doing HADR missions in and around in the Indian Ocean region, or counter piracy, or in helping countries in the Indian Ocean be the first responder, I think a crew and Navy's professionalism is seen and shown. And that sends certain signals to the outside world. Like our fantastic showing in Operation Sankalp in the early part of this year, when the Houthis and all others were creating lots of problems. I mean, they continue to create. It is the Indian Navy that played a proactive role in West Arabian Sea. And whether it was that MV Ruin, which was of Somalia, and we sent, we paradropped our people and rescued everyone. Whether it was a ship that was on fire and other navies refused to go in, and we went in and, got it intact, put down the fire. There are certain indicators, well-known and well-seen indicators of the Indian Navy's professionalism, which would act as a deterrence. So essentially what I'm trying to tell you is, the best deterrence against China is for experts and for country to define. It is not for the Navy to define. What the Navy can do, become a world-class Navy, become a professional Navy, become a very good Navy, and show that if there is something to be done at sea, we will be able to do it efficiently, which I think the Navy is sending.
That's a very fair assessment of the current geopolitical stature. But I believe that for any country, a nation to be a superpower in maritime power, it is important for them to have a presence in different regions.
Yes.
And that comes from aircraft carriers.
Yes.
Do you think we need to amp up our manufacturing production of aircraft carriers? Because China is doing that.
Yes, of course. I believe we need to. And I believe that the third aircraft carrier should be. And again, let me take you back to the naval planners. The naval planners in 47 were thinking of 2 aircraft carriers immediately, followed by 4 aircraft carriers.
You mentioned that.
Yeah. And Admiral Nanda somewhere, if I remember right, has also mentioned 6 aircraft carriers. Now, these were not flights of fancy.
How many do we have right now, sir?
At the moment, we have 2.
We have 2.
Okay. And we have made a bid for 3rd.
And how many does China have?
China at the moment, but I think it's bidding much more.
They're producing about...
Yeah. They will produce. See, to have global ambitions, you need to have, as you said, power projections in different theaters would need aircraft carrier or what we call a carrier task force or a carrier task group.
And the US has about 13, if I'm not wrong.
I haven't got the latest numbers, but it would be in double digits, you know. So certainly, there is no doubt about the fact that the carrier task force or the carrier task group would form the fulcrum of your... Now, does this mean that you don't take in, there is lots of developments about drones, for example, swarms, new technologies. Certainly, you need to take that. The carrier may play a role, but it may play a role differently.
True.
It could be a drone carrier in addition to being a manned carrier. What one is trying to suggest is a bigger truth that, as you brought out, in peace times or in less than conflict, in what can be called as fragile peace times and all that, the one entity that can calibrate power across is a Navy surface task force with a carrier as a central element. That will not change. And a country has to build capabilities to have its fleet centered around a carrier task force. Submarines are very important. Marine commandos are very important. But it's the surface task force that may play an important role in every situation, from war to below war to fragile peace to, humanitarian assistance, disaster, benign and all that.
Right.
So as long as that is there, I see the need for us to have a blue water Navy component. That means bigger ships, destroyers, frigates, long legs, long endurance, with the aircraft carrier, with your integral airborne element in it to be able to do a lot of things.
Right.
Now, what should be the mix of that integral airborne element? How many should be? How should you incorporate the latest technologies? I think that's for the experts.
True. So, Maritime is a subject which is so vast. I can go on with the conversation, but since we're running short on time, I just want to ask you one final question on the subject and connect two worlds. Since we've been speaking about a lot of maritime history, if there was one lesson from each time of that period, ancient, medieval, and then pre-colonization, lesson for the current modern Indian Navy, what would that be, sir?
You want from each period separately, or you want one common?
You can give me 3 lessons from a common factor.
See, I would think the 3 lessons coming from the ancient times up to the Cholas. A nation needs to be open to seas, to influences from the seas, to absorb, imbibe, take. A country needs to have a cosmopolitan character, and that cosmopolitan character is best brought by exposure to seas. That is lesson number 1 from our ancient maritime thought. From the Cholas' time, a country needs to have wide and expansive maritime horizon. It needs to think beyond its immediate geography, think far and wide, and have the ability to create strengths to fulfill that vision. That is from the Cholas' time. From the pre-colonial and medieval times, particularly from the Marathas, the Marakkars too, the Marathas, to stand up to colonialism through both principle and pragmatism, and through great emphasis on self-reliance and individual courage. And I believe in many ways the Indian Navy of today epitomizes all of this. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying anything against the rest of the maritime infrastructure of the country. But I believe the Indian Navy epitomizes all these virtues, and rest of the country in little way needs to be on the same grid with the Indian Navy on this.
Right. Lovely lesson, sir. I hope we integrate this further and we become a strong maritime nation ourselves. Lovely conversation with you. It's so insightful and inspiring as well. So much from history and so much in current time. To end the conversation, I ask my guests 2 personal questions, if you allow me, sir.
Yeah, sure.
First is, if there was any piece of advice you would want to give to your younger self, anyone who is aspiring to be someone like you, what advice would you give them?
I joined the Navy by accident now. So my younger self would join the Navy by choice. I didn't know much about the Navy. The advice is, I would say know more about the Navy, because for me it was clearly an accident. I hope it's not an accident. I hope a lot of younger people join by great spirit and inspiration. So I would tell my younger self to have been more aware of the seas and the Navy,
If you were to tell someone to join the Navy, why would you tell them to join the Navy? What should they have? What kind of attributes should they have to join the Navy?
No, they just need to be, there are certain set of attributes in terms of educational qualifications and all that. I'm not getting into that. Pass the exams and be of that requisite age. I think what they need to have is a certain, love for some level of adventure and thrill. Also some open-mindedness to experience a lot of different kind of experiences. Most importantly, they should be some sort of people's person. If you're too much of a loner, the Navy might not fit you. I mean, no disrespect to the person,
Constantly around people,
but armed forces are all about people, leading people to achieve objectives. So you can't be too much of a loner. Though loners also change after a while by exposure. And you should value, I mean, if you're chasing only money, then probably this is not. Armed forces reward you and compensate you well. But the life is much more. It's about so many experiences. It's about the thrill of camaraderie, of the kind of companionship and friendship that you will never get in any part of the world. I mean, the sort of friendships that you have in the armed forces and in that ecosystem are to cherish for lifetime. You'll not get that.
like bands of brothers.
It's a band of brothers. Absolutely band of brothers. So you must be open to that, Otherwise, the experiences are fantastic.
Done.
So,
last question for today, sir. Since this is called Diary of a Publisher, I make sure to ask my guests about a book that they wish they would have read earlier in life, that gave you the perspective of life, what you have today. But you wish I should have read this before in order to get that wisdom.
Actually, it's interesting. There's a thrilling book not many people have read. It's called The Empires of Monsoon, written by a gentleman called Richard Hall. He's actually a Britisher, but he's written this brilliant book on the Indian Ocean empires. And I wish I had read that, because to me that combines some fantastic scholarship with great storytelling, which I wish I had written it that way. I mean, there are lots of other books, but since we're discussing Maritime, and I discovered it by accident in the library in Nairobi in the Indian High Commission where I was posted, and I read it at that time. Because you had heard of many of the books, this was not heard of. I mean, you heard of, say, Panikkar's books or other, say, maritime historians like Radha Kumud Mukherjee or Ashin Das Gupta. This is thrilling, fast-paced book, but something I loved and something I wish I had read much earlier. It would have made me more curious about the maritime world.
Nice. Beautiful, sir. That's a lovely recommendation. I'll make sure to get my hands on it. And this has been a beautiful conversation for me to understand maritime better, the history and the current as well. Thank you so much for sparing your time and gracing your presence.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity. It's been wonderful being with you, and we've discussed a wide range of issues. So thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. We at Geo-AP are working really hard to take this podcast to the next level. Our guests are going to get even better. Our production quality is going to get even better. And hopefully, I'm going to get even better too. Most importantly, we are committed to being consistent and continue to do what we love the most. Until then, keep reimagining yourself and know that the power of change lies within you. Jai Hind.